Do you think every family has a villain, or is it more complicated?
I did not plan the moment when the room fell quiet around me and my own breath sounded like a winter draft slipping under a door. But I had promised myself before Thanksgiving leftovers were gone that this Christmas would not be another slow bleed in a sparkly sweater where I smile, hand over my card, and pretend I do not notice the way people who share my last name have learned to lean back in their chairs the second a server appears with that little black leather folio, because somewhere between childhood stockings and adult calendars, I became the person who pays, not out of generosity exactly, but out of habit, out of guilt, out of the belief that if I keep everything smooth, then nobody will say the sharp thing I am always afraid is hiding behind the polite one. The pattern crept up over years like those pine needles that show up in May even though the tree went to the curb ages ago, and it looks like this. My mother turns the volume up on Bing Crosby as if volume is glue. My father offers a speech about what truly matters but never reaches for his wallet. My sister winks about getting me back next time, even though next time never arrives. My cousin Brad saunters in late with a new watch and a story about a startup that has not started anything except his appetite. My Aunt Linda produces the kind of perfume that gets to the table before she does, and the words "I've got it" fall out of my mouth with the same reliable timing as the first chorus of White Christmas, after which the table relaxes. Orders expand, and I become the background hum like the heating vent, steady, useful, invisible. I would love to tell you I paid because I am a saint or a strategic thinker, but the truth sounds smaller and slightly pathetic, which is that paying kept me safe, because paying bought quiet, bought the illusion that we were a normal family who teased but never cut deep. And when friends joked that I must have a rewards card made of titanium, I laughed it off and said the miles were worth it even though the miles never took me anywhere I actually wanted to go. They just let me keep flying in circles over the same household weather system where everyone depended on me to be sunny. This year something in me felt different in a way I could not name, but could feel like a tightness behind my ribs, and while I still did the things I always do, ordered the peppermint mochas for the pre-shopping meetup, booked the dinner reservation at a place with lighting kind to faces that have known some winters, wrapped gifts in paper so pretty my mother said it was a shame to tear it. I also tucked a quiet promise under my tongue. A promise that I would not keep writing a script that made me the punchline at my own expense, because I am generous, but I am not a fool, and there is a difference that becomes very clear when you look at your credit card statement and realize the season of giving has turned into a season of being taken. Maybe the shift started in the way my hand hovered over the tip line at a coffee shop and I wrote something extra for the barista who remembered my name even though I only see her twice a month, because being seen is a more expensive gift than anything wrapped. Or maybe it started when I put the reservation in a personal note with the manager, a woman named Claire who sounded brisk and competent over the phone, and asked if she could please, just this once, prepare separate checks for separate people and not mention it until I gave a nod, since our family likes to act like money is a breeze none of us can control, drifting toward me by pure accident, and I wanted to see what happened if the breeze suddenly changed direction. If you think that sounds petty, I hear you, and you may be right, but I have learned that small adjustments make big weather, and my plan was not to humiliate anyone or stage a reality show at the table. My plan was to watch quietly and measure who we are when the script malfunctions, and perhaps that is a little ruthless, but kindness without boundaries eventually turns into resentment with a bow on top. And I was tired of untying that bow every December like clockwork. The day of the dinner arrived with the kind of brittle cold that makes your breath look like speech bubbles, and I had already done the Midwestern mom thing even though I am not a mom. Extra gloves in my bag, stain sticks because red wine is a liar, chargers for people who never charge anything but their voices, so when I walked into my parents' kitchen and heard the clatter of trays and the small, domestic music of holiday chaos, nothing suggested that this would be the year the tradition snapped, nothing except that quiet promise lodged under my tongue and the knowledge that Claire would be watching for my signal like we were running a very gentle heist that would end in nothing more dramatic than honesty. I poured myself seltzer and leaned against the counter, letting the steam from the oven fog my glasses while my mother fussed with ribbons and my father told a story I had heard so many times I could have lip-synced it. Until the kind of thing happened that turns your skin cold even when the room is warm, a soft aside floating in from the hallway where coats were piled and perfume lingered, an ordinary voice carrying an extraordinary sentence that split me right down the center. Because I recognized my Aunt Linda's laugh, the one that always sounds like she is finishing a joke, and then I heard the words that landed with a quiet thud exactly where my promise was sitting. Don't worry, he'll pay. He's nothing but an ATM anyway. And before you tell me I misheard or took it out of context, I will tell you I stood perfectly still and listened to the air go thin, and I decided right then that I would not only keep my cool, but make a little adjustment that would feel like an early present to myself. So I pulled out my phone, opened the reservation email, and wrote a single line to Claire that did not sound angry or dramatic, just practical and polite. Please make sure every seat has its own bill tonight, after which I put my phone away, set my face to neutral, and stepped toward the doorway where the voices were fading, because sometimes the first act of revenge is not sharp or showy. It is simply refusing to be what someone has named you, which is why when the server would later set down the check, I would let it rest like a snowflake that does not melt, then push it forward with one finger and say, in the calmest voice I own, your turn, but I had not reached that moment yet. And when I took one more step, I saw my aunt's profile reflected in the hallway mirror, her mouth still curved, and I said her name, very softly, right as she turned and saw me standing there. There is a special kind of silence that shows up when a person realizes she has been caught being exactly who she is, and when my aunt turned toward me in that narrow hallway, her perfume pooling under the coat rack and her mouth already forming the next easy joke, I watched the recognition pass across her face like a shadow moving over snow, followed by a smile that tried to pretend nothing had happened, which would have worked if I were the version of me who lets grace cover every bruise. But I was not that woman anymore, not after hearing myself described as a machine with buttons and a slot, a convenient appliance dressed in holiday red. I did not make a scene, because scenes are for people who want applause and I only wanted clarity, so I leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and asked a question in a voice that sounded taught by Catholic school calm, the kind of voice that could sell cemetery plots. Who were you talking about? Which gave her the small dignity of an exit she had not earned, and when she squeaked some sentence about joking around, about how families tease, about how I know we appreciate you, honey, I let her finish every syllable like a child allowed to recite lines in a pageant, then nodded as if she had just read a weather report and said, good to know, even as my stomach did the small, hard flip that happens when your body understands something your brain would rather not, namely that love which requires tribute is not love at all, it is accounting. There was a time when that realization would have sent me spiraling into explanations and discounts, the kind where I tell myself she is stressed, the season is heavy, the wine is doing the talking. And if I keep everyone fed, nobody will notice the crack in the plaster that runs from the stairs to the ceiling. But I have carried more than my share of emotional spackle, and the bucket is empty. So instead of mopping her mess, I excused myself with a smile that felt like a closed drawer, walked back into the kitchen where my mother was tying ribbon like she was racing a clock, and took my phone to the corner where the signal is strongest, because if my aunt had named me an ATM, then I would behave like a bank in one important way. I would post a notice hours before the branch closed. I opened the family group chat, icon set to a blurry photo of last year's tree, everyone still wearing their coats, because we could not agree who would take the picture without looking bloated. And I typed a message with the kind of cheerful efficiency people use when they are pretending they just learned something neutral. Heads up for tonight. The restaurant is doing separate checks per seat. Manager asked me to remind everybody to bring whatever you plan to pay with, cash or card, both fine. See you there. And I sat there long enough to see the read receipts march across the screen like a row of tiny blinking ornaments, after which came the predictable cascade of tap-tap anxieties. My cousin asking whether they take contactless. My sister asking if she could Venmo me if her card acts up again. My father replying with a thumbs up because men of his generation think an emoji is an action. And my aunt dropping a glittering, oh of course, great idea, takes the pressure off you, sweetie, which would have been hilarious if it weren't an accidental confession. The thing about patterns is that once you jostle them even a little, the threads that looked decorative start to show their load-bearing function, and I felt the weight shift in the room without a single raised voice. A redistribution of invisible responsibilities that produced a strange lightness in my chest, the kind you get when you put down a box you did not realize was heavy. And in that calm, I let my mind take inventory of every Christmas I had subsidized under the banner of tradition. The way cousins ordered the most expensive steak because it's once a year, the way my aunt chose appetizer towers named for ocean animals, the way my sister promised to treat me next time, and then remembered in March that she had a dentist bill. And in that remembering I felt both anger and relief. Anger for the years I trained them to expect the free ride, and relief because training works both ways, and tonight I was teaching a new trick. When it was time to bundle up and head out, I watched my aunt fumble with her purse in the classic routine of the person who has always arrived at the theater confident that someone else bought the tickets, and I did not say a word about it. Not when she asked casually whether the place had valet, not when she wondered aloud if it was rude to ask the server to split dessert 3 ways, not when she patted her coat pockets as though a black Amex might materialize by pure intention, because the only line I planned to deliver tonight was at the exact moment the check reached the table, and I wanted my voice clean and steady for that 10-word sentence. Yet, even before that moment, I allowed myself a small, precise piece of revenge that felt both necessary and, if I am being honest, satisfying in a way that warmed me more than the heater in my car, which was simply this. I opened my banking app, scrolled to the family Amazon account that had quietly routed through my card for the better part of 2 years under the guise of holiday convenience, and with one long, decisive tap I removed my payment method and set purchase approvals to manual. Then I screenshot the confirmation and dropped it privately to my aunt with a gentle note that read, "Notice some auto-renewals piling up. You should have control now," which landed like a snowball toss, soft and true, playful on the outside and cold at the core, after which I tucked my phone away, turned the key, and pulled into the night, where the restaurant lights would soon be glowing like a runway, guiding us all toward a landing none of them expected, and I had been rehearsing in my head for weeks. By the time we pulled into the parking lot, the December air had settled into that sharp, crystalline cold that makes your breath look like it carries secrets, and I could feel the hum of anticipation in my chest. Not the kind of anticipation that comes before a gift is opened, but the heavier kind that comes before a decision you know cannot be walked back. And as I watched my family shuffle from their cars, stamping their feet against the salt-dusted pavement, I thought about how many Christmases I had rehearsed this exact entrance, arriving first, smoothing over the reservations, handing out menus like an usher guiding a congregation, always the one who steadied the wheel before anyone even knew we were drifting. And I realized that tonight I was still steadying the wheel, but in a way that would point the entire ship in a different direction whether they liked it or not. Inside, the restaurant glowed with that soft golden light people pay extra for, the kind that makes tired skin look like memory instead of fatigue, and while the hostess led us toward the big table tucked near the windows, my mother carried on about how beautiful the wreaths looked. My father told a story about the drive over as if traffic itself were a comedy routine, and my aunt floated behind them with her laugh trailing in little bursts like perfume, each one a reminder of the hallway words she thought would stay hidden, though every syllable still rang in my ears like coins dropping into a machine. The table filled quickly, jackets shrugged off, voices rising, menus opening with that little paper crackle, and I let myself watch them with the detachment of a scientist studying lab mice, noting how effortlessly they fell into the roles we had all played before. Brad making some remark about how he might go for the tomahawk steak this year since it's tradition, my sister sighing dramatically about how she deserved 2 cocktails because she had worked so hard wrapping presents, and my aunt whispering to the waiter about oysters even before water glasses were filled, every gesture reinforcing the certainty that someone else would smooth the check at the end, and every gesture feeding the small fire in me that wanted to see what they looked like when that certainty cracked. I did not interrupt the rituals because rituals tell you more than rebellion does, so I smiled at jokes I had heard a dozen times. I listened while my cousin bragged about crypto that had apparently resurrected itself. And I even accepted the little wink from my aunt when the first bottle of wine arrived. as though she and I were in on the same joke, though in reality the only joke was that she thought I was still the kind of woman who paid to keep the peace, when in fact I had learned that peace without respect is just another form of servitude, and servitude wears down even the strongest backs until all that remains is resentment with a price tag. When the entrees arrived, sizzling and steaming like a commercial for indulgence, I felt my phone buzz lightly in my pocket, and when I glanced down I saw a message from Claire, the manager, confirming everything was set, each bill separated, each seat marked, and that she would be watching for my cue. And the steadiness of that small reassurance let me lean back in my chair with a calm I had not felt in years, the calm of knowing that no matter how loud the laughter got or how many extravagant plates were ordered, I would not be the one to foot the circus this time, and in that knowledge a new kind of humor rose in me, the humor of finally recognizing that generosity without boundaries is not kindness, but currency traded at a loss. As dessert menus hit the table and the family began their annual chorus about splitting tiramisu and creme brulee, I let myself drift into memory, recalling the years I drove home with a hollow ache in my chest, receipts tucked like scars in my purse, pretending I had given joy when really I had been drained of it, and I contrasted that version of me with the woman sitting here now, sipping slowly on her coffee, letting the conversation swirl without feeling responsible for everyone's comfort. And I knew with bone-deep certainty that tonight would be the first time they understood what it costs me to play Santa without the beard, and how quickly the sleigh ride ends when the reindeer finally sit down. The server approached, eyes flicking briefly to mine, waiting for the smallest signal, and I gave it with nothing more than a slight incline of my head, an almost imperceptible nod that set the final stage in motion, and I could feel the temperature in my veins change. Warmer, heavier, as if preparing for impact, because the entire evening, every glass clink and every hollow toast had been leading to this single moment when the check would land and my family would look toward me with the reflex of habit, the reflex I had spent years training into them, and I would finally, decisively, break that reflex with one quiet push that would sound like liberation dressed up as an invitation. I sat back, folded my napkin neatly, and let my lips curve into a smile that gave nothing away, because in just a few minutes the waiter would arrive carrying the leather folder that had always felt like an invisible chain. And tonight that chain would slip from my wrists onto the table for all of them to see, waiting, ready to be picked up by someone else, while I leaned back, calm, patient, and almost amused, knowing the evening had finally turned into the experiment I had promised myself, an experiment that would either break us apart or finally show them the weight I had carried in silence, and I was ready for either result. The leather folder landed with the soft, practiced thud that always makes a table pause mid-laugh, and in that small pause I felt the familiar choreography trying to reassert itself, the quick glances toward me, the joking comments about how I should be accruing airline miles just for tolerating our family, the little half-reaches for purses that never actually open. Yet before the old scene could begin its loop I placed the folder squarely in the center like a centerpiece no one had ordered, rested my palm on it for a quiet beat that held every year of automatic generosity I had handed over without ceremony, and then slid it toward the far edge with a deliberate motion that drew every pair of eyes the way a dealer slides a final card. After which I lifted my chin, met my aunt's expectant smile that was already bending into gratitude she had not earned, and said in a tone so even it could have been a weather report, "Your turn." The words did not need to be loud, because clarity does not shout, and the effect was immediate and strangely elegant, a ripple that moved from my aunt's face to my cousin's hands to my sister's posture to my father's throat where his swallow went visible. After which the room's holiday soundtrack seemed to rearrange itself, sleigh bells becoming metronomes as the waiter approached with a small constellation of separate checks, each clipped to its own tidy booklet, each little stack a mirror that reflected back a single, unavoidable question, which was not whether I could afford to pay but whether anyone else could afford to behave as if they were entitled to me doing it. I had prepared for their lines the way a lawyer prepares for cross-examination, and they arrived on schedule, my cousin Brad making a cheerful crack about his wallet being in his other jacket as though a misplaced rectangle of leather were a personality trait, My sister widening her eyes in that practiced expression of helpless charm that has bought her many favors and some expensive shoes, my aunt touching the rim of her water glass like it might whisper instructions if she kept it company, my mother beginning a soft plea that sounded like peacekeeping but was really the old spell that tells women to make themselves small so the men around them can stay comfortable. Yet before any of that could turn into the usual guilt fog, I reached for my own booklet, slid out my card, and said with a lightness I actually felt, "I'm covering my coffee and the tip for this incredible staff, because I'd like them to have a very good night, and the rest of you have individual checks, which is fair and festive in its own grown-up way." The waiter, bless him, did not blink, and I caught the faintest tug at the corner of his mouth. A barely there smile that said he had seen variations of this play across countless Decembers, and that he was rooting quietly for the character who finally deviated from the script, after which he distributed each folder with professional neutrality. And the table went bright white in the face, not theatrical white, not fainting couch white, but the kind of washed-out astonishment that happens when entitlement meets daylight, and while they stared at the arithmetic of their appetites, I tucked my napkin beneath my plate, exhaled for what felt like the first time all month, and noticed how lovely the garland looked when you are not squinting through the heat haze of resentment. Because revenge tastes better when it is served as accountability and not spectacle, I let the silence breathe until it grew instructional, and then, in the same measured tone a doctor uses to deliver plain facts kindly, I slid a small craft envelope across the table to my aunt, not dramatic, not weaponized, just placed like a party favor, and said, "I brought you this because I wanted you to have full control." At which point she pulled the flap and found a single printed page confirming that the family Amazon account no longer drew from my card, and that all auto-renewals would now require authorization from the primary user, a small domestic audit disguised as a courtesy. And when her eyes started up with that quick flash of indignation that always arrives before a person remembers to put on graciousness, my phone vibrated with the precise, chiming discretion of a bank notification. A tidy banner announcing that a streaming bundle had just failed payment for the first time in 2 years, which I did not read aloud because I did not need to, given that my aunt's phone lit up with its own reminder, and she swallowed hard enough that even the candles seemed to flicker. My father began to say something about tradition and togetherness and the meaning of Christmas, the kind of speech I used to let wash over me like lukewarm water. Yet I gently put my fingertips on the edge of his booklet and turned it toward him so he could see the neat breakdown of his order, the steak he had said he deserved, the second glass of wine that had deserved him back. The tax he always pretended was a surprise, and I said, not unkindly, that togetherness costs everyone something, and that this year the cost would be distributed, and if that sounded like a manifesto, it was really just math with a bow, at which point the check shuffle commenced, cards appearing with the solemnity of church offerings. My sister whispering that she would pay me back tomorrow and me replying cheerfully that there was nothing to pay me for, my cousin asking if contactless counted as festive, my aunt fishing for cash and producing a handful of crumpled receipts as if paper could be alchemy. To sweeten the moment and make sure the evening was not only a correction but also a clear message, I flagged the waiter and paid the gratuity on the entire table before anyone else could undercut it, told him to split it among the staff, thanked him by name, and watched his posture shift in that tiny way people shift when the world briefly makes sense. Then I leaned back and let the micrometeor shower of signatures and swipes light the table with the faint blue glow of phone screens and card readers, after which the conversation attempted a weak relaunch about weather and travel and childhood ornaments. Yet the air had changed in a way they could not name, and, while they were relearning the mechanics of adulthood, my aunt's voice rose with that brittle brightness she uses to hide a bruise, telling the table she had always meant to insist on paying sometimes, and that this was great, really, so healthy, while her eyes stayed on me as if waiting for a reprieve that was not coming. I finished my coffee, set the cup down with care, and considered telling them what I had overheard in the hallway, considered naming the insult and pinning it to the corkboard of the evening like a lesson plan. But there is a kind of power in leaving a blank space where a confession might go, so instead I stood, slid into my coat, hugged my mother, who was still tying invisible bows in the air, and told the table I would see them back at the house. At which point my aunt's phone pinged again, brighter and more urgent, and she blanched in a way that made my cousin lean forward, while my father, who has never liked not knowing, asked in a voice that tried to sound casual whether everything was all right, and I watched the way she swallowed and forced a smile and said, "Fine. Absolutely fine," as I walked toward the door and felt the next part of the plan clicking into place, because while dinner had ended cleanly, the real reckoning had barely begun, and the night still had a gift left to open. Back at the house, the living room looked like a department store's idea of family, every lamp turned on and every surface twinkling with something metallic, the television waiting at a paused frame for a movie none of us actually watch but always pretend to. And as coats were flung over banisters and shoes kicked loose in the hallway, I could feel the old choreography drag itself up for an encore, people talking louder than necessary, people laughing a decibel higher than sincerity requires. The whole place scented with spiced candles and the faint burn of a pie that had waited too long in a warm oven, yet beneath the bright noise there was the new hush that follows a plate tectonic shift. And while my mother fluttered with plates and my father announced that he would slice the pie as if it were a ceremonial duty, my aunt hovered near the television with a smile too tight for comfort, tapping the remote with the nervous intent of someone who has always believed that technology, like dinner checks, will eventually bend to her will if she insists brightly enough. I set my bag down, took the pie knife from my father before he cut the lattice into odd trapezoids, and watched the first small reckoning arrive disguised as inconvenience, which is how these things always come. Because the little spinning wheel on the screen froze halfway through the opening credits, and the streaming account coughed up a polite message about a payment method issue, and when my aunt said, "That's odd," in a tone calibrated to suggest fate had personally targeted her family's Christmas spirit, my mother reached for a DVD from a basket of artifacts nobody had touched since the last election, while my cousin offered to hotspot from his phone like a magician volunteering fire from his sleeve, and I simply said, "Try logging in again," not because I wanted to humiliate anyone but because truth, like gravity, needs no speech, and within 3 steps my aunt had discovered that the profile picture of my dog no longer presided over the household's monthly charges. At which point, she shot me a look that might have scorched a field in summer, and I answered it with the quietest nod I own. There is a point in every family drama when the stage manager inside you either pulls the curtain or flips on the work lights, and since I had spent too many years in the wings fetching props, I decided the work lights would serve us better. So while the others fussed with remotes and nostalgia, I went to the kitchen and returned with the craft envelope she had opened at the restaurant, slid the single page onto the coffee table next to the remote, and said, because plain language is kinder then elaborate diplomacy, "I heard you in the hallway before dinner," which turned the room into a held breath, my sister going very still, my father blinking twice in a way I have only seen when the doctor reads labs, my mother lifting a hand toward her neck as though searching for a necklace she had forgotten to put on, and my aunt, to her credit, meeting my eyes with a flush that was not entirely shame and not entirely anger, but some compound made of both, saying that she had been joking and that I should know she loves me, after which I said I do know something, which is that love that calls a person an ATM does not know the pin to anything that matters. Because I have learned that victory without terms is just another skirmish scheduled for next month, I reached into my bag and brought out a second envelope. Not a ledger and not a manifesto, but a single sheet printed with a neat list of dates and totals from the past handful of Christmases, numbers written out in words, because that is how you read them when you narrate your own history. A final line that said, "Tradition," followed by an empty space, and tucked under it an unsigned check drawn on my account for the exact amount of last year's entire holiday outlay: dinners, gifts, stocking stuffers, the extra cash I slid to my cousin when his rent was weird, and I put a pen beside it and said, without heat and without sweetness, that she could choose what to do with it. She could sign it and reimburse me if she thought debts should be squared. She could sign it to a charity my mother loves if she believed in generosity more than scorekeeping, or she could leave it blank and we would let The papers say what words could not, which is that I was handing back the power to define what kind of family we intended to be when December rolled around again. My aunt did not reach for the pen, not right away, and the pause that followed was not empty but thick with every easy laugh and every shrugged next time, and into that pause my sister said, with a wince that sounded like honesty finally practicing out loud, that she had counted on me because I made it easy to be lazy. My father admitted that he liked speeches because they were cheaper than habits. My mother whispered that she had known, of course she had known, and had hoped it would all level out as these things always do, and I said that leveling out is what rivers do after the flood moves through, not what people do when one person builds a dam and everyone else enjoys the view. After which I picked up the envelope and put it back in my bag because the point was not to force a scene where everyone chose sides. The point was to place the choice where it belonged and walk away before I tidied anything to make them feel better about it. We did manage to watch something eventually, some old network special that looked grainy and harmless, and we ate pie that had gone slightly soggy and laughed in the way people laugh when they are grateful for a bridge back to normal voices. And when it was time to leave, I hugged my mother longer than usual and told my father he could keep the knife, which made him snort like I had told a clever joke, and at the door my aunt stepped forward with the fierce determination of someone who wants the last word to be a truce, said that she would call me tomorrow, said that she was sorry even if the words sounded like they had splinters, and I told her that tomorrow is wide open and that next December is wider, which is a sentence that sounds like forgiveness until you notice it has a border. In the car the heater whined and the windshield gathered fine lace at the edges while my phone lit up with the kind of messages people send when they are trying to soften the angle of a truth just told. My sister promising to sort her part, and then some. My father asking if I would help him set up his own streaming because he wanted to learn how to pay for what he used. My mother sending a heart that said more than a paragraph could manage, and my aunt finally typing out 3 short lines. I get it, I was wrong. Tell me how to fix it, to which I replied that fixing is not a button and that I would see how things looked in a week, a month, a season, because I am done fast-tracking reconciliation like a rush delivery gift. Sometime after midnight a photo showed up in the family thread, the unsigned check I had left tucked under my arm replaced by another check entirely. A new one laid on the same coffee table, made out in clean cursive to the shelter my mother volunteers at. The memo line reading, for families who deserve a good night, no signature visible in the image because a hand was covering it. Nails painted the exact winter red my aunt favors, and I stared at it long enough to hear the small engine of hope turn over in my chest without quite catching, then locked my phone, put both hands on the wheel as the stoplight changed, and drove home in a city that sparkled like it always does the week before Christmas, thinking that sometimes the only way to find out whether people mean what they say is to leave enough quiet for them to say it when you are not in the room, and that next December sits on the calendar like a sealed envelope I am in no hurry to open.